All Americans, please give me your gold. People didn't realize what was going on in the economy. All right, Naomi.
Welcome everyone. We are live here for the AIER Authors Corner, and I'm absolutely delighted to have the wonderful Jeffrey Tucker here, and we're going to be talking about something of particular interest to Jeffrey. I've been following him over the last few months with his obsession with clocks, and we're going to be discussing that. He's written a couple of fantastic articles for AIER that you should all check out, and I'll put them in the links in the video. But welcome to the show, Jeffrey.
Sure, it's nice to be here. So, yeah, and thank you for interviewing me on this peculiar topic. It turns out it's very interesting. We look at any normal item around you. Most everything has a history, and through discovering that history, you discover the progress of civilization, technologically speaking, and you can tell a story about the rise of prosperity through markets. And the clocks are a great example of that. So, of course, I became obsessed with it.
Of course you became obsessed with it. Now, what I loved about these articles, so your first article, The Mystical Magic of the Mechanical Clock. So we're not necessarily talking about digital clocks, although we will discuss that later on. But your obsession lies with analog, mechanical, springs and coils and things that just have their own inertia and momentum and keep itself running. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Right. So the strangest thing about them is you don't have to plug them in, which sounds like really obvious, but actually I was alarmed at first. I was like, wait, how is it possible that something can move and actually be useful to us without being plugged into the wall? I mean, I just couldn't believe it. Like, wait, what?
How could something in my life be useful if it's not plugged into a wall? Like that, it's funny you joke, but I think that really is the mindset of a lot of people these days.
Yeah, it's really true, and I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, so maybe you plug it in, and then it runs for like a day, like my iPhone. Then you have to plug it in again, But no, these things you never plug them in, so it's actually kind of amazing. And there's also something aesthetically wonderful about them, the way they tick. And I began to notice that there was a difference between the tick of, say, 1880 and the tick of, say, 1910.
Wait a second. You're noticing the difference in the sound of the tick.
Yes, and as a musician, you can understand because some ticks go, right? Other ticks go, right? So you begin to be aware that the tick can be divided into either half or 1/3. But actually, like a lot of the ticks from about, say, 1880, the clocks built in the latter part of the earlier part of the Gilded Age in America, split the difference between 2 and 3. And so, if there's a clock next to you and you're lying in bed listening to it, you can create like mental illusions for yourself. Like you can pretend like it's divided in 2, and then you pretend like it's divided into 3, and you're wondering if you're tricking yourself, and and what the subdivision between 2 and 3. Anyway, it makes you crazy. And then you get like obsessed with the gongs, and what they sound like. Some of them just sound like an aluminum pan being hit with a wooden spoon, and others sound very luxurious and beautiful. And as time went on, the clocks began to get more stable and more beautiful, and it was really interesting. So I just began to look at my obsession with these clocks. Really began when I found one in an old antique store and brought it home, and I was shocked to discover that it actually worked. Need a little bit of cleaning and some oil, but it actually works. So then I began to gather, ever more of these things, and a lot of them didn't work. And then that got me into the clock repair industry, which is its own peculiarities. It's a strange industry of its own. So anyway, that's the story.
That's your story. But I want to step back a little bit. I want to go back to, this perception of time that we have. And, you know, these days you get a lot of these self-help books that are kind of helping people deal with this sense of time. You know, they're saying like, you know, we are too much in like pressuring ourselves, or sometimes we we're too busy letting time get taken away from us with distractions, or, you know, there's a lot of this sort of meditation stuff based around time and all of this. But really clocks and the sense of time, there was a certain point in history when this sort of became a thing. You know, prior to clocks and prior to people having clocks, people used to live in rural areas and they'd probably wake up with the sun and go to sleep with the sun, etc. So let's talk about when we started to structure our lives around needing like a set idea of time.
Yeah, now so Naomi, this is what's fascinating to me, because really in the Middle Ages, once we began to develop the technologies that we could use to actually build clocks, to be able to keep track of time was quite a remarkable innovation. And some of the earliest clocks, you know, date from the High Middle Ages, really. Because that's when we began to develop the ability. Let me turn this off. So sorry. The ability to track it at all, and you would have only the richest city would have one big clock in the middle of it, you know, something like this. But just like the phones used to be kind of this community thing, clocks went from community to from one big town to being eventually in household, and then finally on a wrist, and we're carrying them around, you know, and it was a glorious thing. But what you're speaking of is fascinating to me, because I'll tell you how I discovered the story. It's like you discover these things not so much by reading books, although I'm sure those information is in books, but all you have to really do is talk to a practitioner, an expert. And I was talking to the owner of the clock store in Atlanta about all of his various clocks, which are slightly oddly higher priced than the clocks in the Northeast, by the way, for reasons that are interesting. But we were talking about the American clock industry, which by 1910 in Connecticut employed 30,000 people. It was a gigantic big industry, especially in Connecticut, and there were many, many makers of these clocks.
Well, clocks were like this new tech. They were this new thing that, you know, I mean, anytime you see a new tech boom, that industry just grows and creates more jobs, and then the demand sort of like it leads into that, and so it makes sense.
This unity of the mass production technology together with the consumer demand, and then when that happens, it just becomes combustible and creates this gigantic industry. And I asked him, why is it that it was Connecticut, and why was it in, you know, the late 19th century and early part of the 20th century that this industry bloomed? I mean, like, where did the consumer demand for clocks come from? Did it previously exist and was underserved, or did it just suddenly supply and demand just began to move along the curves together? You know, what happened? And he said, oh, well, there's an easy answer to that. You know, we used to be an agricultural economy, and in an agricultural economy, the need to show up on time and to be regulated by time is not really there. I mean, you're getting up with the sun, or you know where the moon is, and you're like part of nature, and it's just like keeping time is just not the thing. But once you leave the country, move to the city, and start working in the factory system, then you develop shifts, and you have to show up on time, and then your time runs out, and you've got to get home, and dinner is served at a particular time, and so on. So everything begins to change. So everybody had this desperate need to keep track of time, and also there's an element of pride in doing so. And I have one clock here in the house that I'm at the American Institute for Economic Research, which is really beautiful. I put it up in room 200. It's from about 1910. And it's really interesting because it's very, very beautiful. I didn't bring it down here to show it to you, but it's very beautiful.
How big is it? I wish that I could see that, because you've been talking about these clocks for a while.
Yeah. I'll show you one here in a second I did bring down, but it's about like this big. It's a mantle clock, but it's made of wood. And most of the European clocks at the time were made of stone for high-end families. But if you want to reduce them in price so that, say, it's a month's salary or something like that, then you have to make them out of wood, but they're painted in this trompe l'oeil, so it looks like marble on the side, and the gold paint looks like gold gilding, but it's just gold paint, you know. So and the wood looks like stone, so it's painted in this sort of stone-like way. but the accuracy is really very much there. And it's just a clock for the middle class, really. But it looks like a high-end clock, so it kind of illustrates this funny thing about the American personality in this period of time. Everybody wanted to see themselves rise in social status and have things that look like they belong to the rich, because you want to be rich. So you want to own things that look rich-like.
It's funny because, like, I mean, the idea of a clock as a status symbol, it seems so ridiculous now, but it shouldn't, because watches, as timepieces have evolved, watches have also kind of been a similar status symbol, the evolution of, like, the Rolex. So what's the name of that ridiculously expensive watch that is like 500 grand or something now? Like, what are they?
It still goes on.
It still goes on. Some things never change.
I'm not really interested in watches. I never have been, although maybe that's the next thing to me. I don't know. You can't rule it out. But the clocks themselves, yeah, they illustrated a kind of social status. And actually, let me show you one, because I have it here. And I love this one because, what I mean when I say grandfather clock?
Yeah, we used to have one at our house, and I used to love it. It had these 2 weights inside of it, and every month or so you'd have to like,
So it was a 30-day clock. But back in the latter part of the 19th century, we began to be able to make 8-day clocks, which is quite an innovation. But just 50 years earlier, the only kind of clocks you could make were 30-hour clocks, and so that and they were not spring run. They were run by these weights you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Probably the one you have that you're talking about was really quartz, and I don't really understand how all that really works. But back in the 1830s and 40s, all the clocks were run by weights. So the clock I'm showing you right now is a particularly delight for me because it is an American clock. The American clock industry began in about 1830. I think this one was built around 1840, and it's a miniature grandfather clock. So it's a clock that was designed for a mantle, but it's a 30-hour clock and with weights. And maybe I could just show it to you right now. And I love it too because it's got this a picture of Washington's home called Mount Rushmore, or not Mount Rushmore, Mount Vernon. And see, here you can see the clock.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's pretty, isn't it? And so you can see the little mechanisms working inside here, and it's moving, and the tick is in there. But I'm going to open it now, and here you see now the advertisement for Waterbury Clock Company here. Mm-hmm. So just to make sure that you get a good advertisement in there. And now this clock has been running for probably about not even 12 hours, but you can already see that it's starting to be in need of winding. So I'm gonna wind the one on the left. The one on the left here handles the sound of the gong, which is actually very pretty. And and here you see an example of the steak marble. This is trump toy. This is actually wood, but it looks like marble.
Huh.
So it's kind of fun. And so that's the left side, and then here's the right. And you have to do this every day. Now, it was funny because I was talking to one of many clock experts that I know now these days. I'm in touch with all these people. In fact, I have an article coming out in the Horological Times, which is the official journal of the mechanical clock repair industry. But he says he prefers these 30-hour clocks because they're so fun to play with. He wants to, yeah, right? So it's pretty interesting, right? It's really interesting. But anyway, the point is that what intrigues me is that I can sort of, through the development of the clock, look at that, stop the tick. But through the development of the clock, you can actually trace the development of capitalism. And this unity of technology and consumer demand just came together and created this gigantic industry in America at the turn of the century. We still are left with the remnants of it everywhere. You can probably go to, if you live in a decent-sized town, find a shop somewhere where they have old clocks. and pick one up. There's something too, Naomi, that's really interesting to me about it. I am not sure that it's possible to recreate the warmth and beauty of a mechanical clock tick through digital means. There's something really physical about it that is really enrapturing. And you'd think that a clock that ticks this loudly and dongs every half hour would keep you awake all night. But for some reason, it just doesn't. After the first hour of dealing with it, well, actually, after the first minutes, here's what happens to you. You're lying in bed, you hear this clock, and you think, jeez, I'm never going to go to sleep with that tick. And then it does something to you. You know, it's like this.
Well, so that's what they have on all the movies, right? The hypnosis that happens. You know, they ticking clock and suddenly you're out. Maybe something like that. But you know what's interesting, Jeffrey, is that you know, there's this whole idea, especially in architecture, and you know, as tech evolves, like, you know, we seek the comfort of the things that we're used to, and so we tend to attach these superfluous you know, features onto things like new technology as they evolve. Because you look at the like battery operated clocks that you have these days, they're annoying as hell. And you know why? Because that ticking isn't serving any purpose. That's just something that, you know, is kind of put on for effect, because it's something that was comforting and showed you, you know, that literally the moving of time, and people were used to. And then they introduced this sound into these battery powered clocks that didn't really need to be making that kind of a sound, and then it just became annoying. Suddenly it wasn't you know, it had a different meaning there. So that's very interesting.
It is. And if you listen carefully, I mean it's true in a Kierkegaardian sense that no one tick is like any of the other tick, because they necessarily exist in a different point in the forward motion of time, which is kind of an intriguing thing to think about. But it also is true that when you hear the physicality of the tick, it does something for you. And they're addictive. I mean, I talked to a collector the other day who says that he has 25 clocks in his house.
25?
25 mechanical clocks, that he loves them so much that he just surrounds himself by clocks all the time. I kind of get it. I don't want to become that guy, but I could easily understand how it could happen to you.
Become like a crazy clock man.
Like a cat lady, a clock man, right? Yeah. And anyway, I think it's really interesting how you can just pick up any object and see the progress of civilization. But we don't reflect on it enough. And this is one of the things that frustrates me about basically all modern politics, is that we just take for granted all the things that are around us. We don't reflect about, you know, the generations and generations, the hundreds, even thousands of years that were necessary to develop the technologies, defer consumption, and develop the savings that are necessary to invest in these factories that produce these things for the common person, and how we just get dropped into the stream of history. It's like plunk, you know, here you are, and you're surrounded by all these beautiful things all around you, and you just take them for granted. It's like AOC, you know, babbling on about how she wants to reconstruct every building in the United States, and we should just get rid of internal combustion. And all, meanwhile, she's flying all over the country, you know, and airplanes using gas.
Well, it brings us back to the article you wrote last week, Jeffrey. You know, when you're talking about this wonderful opening where you're like, you know, she's talking about the end of the world and we should stop having kids and all of these things, but I was busy looking at where did she get her sweet potatoes, because that's the thing, you know, she's in her kitchen with all her modern conveniences that have been made possible, you know, by all of these things that she wants to abolish. So I mean, if she really was that keen on making a change, she could start to abolish these things from her own life, you know. And that's the thing, people don't voluntarily choose to give up these things. They want to force everyone to give up these things, you know. Let's not even talk about the unintended consequences that would happen from those things that these people haven't thought through. But, you know, if they really wanted to make an impact, individuals can make a tremendous impact, but you don't see them voluntarily giving up these things.
No, they don't. And she would say that, well, you know, I have to live in the world as it's been given to me. But that's, I think, just the point. This world has been given to you. You know, we have all we're the inheritors of this benevolence of centuries of sacrifice and innovation and the sophisticated development of supply chains and it comes to us that the world literally cannot be recreated through central planning. We can only just appreciate the benevolence of what we've been given by the ages, and then just slightly try to figure out a way to improve it.
Yeah.
And I'm just, it's like, I don't think there's any such thing as history. There's only a history of things, or a history of ideas or particular ideas. And it's through the focus on that we just develop a kind of an awesome respect for everything that came before. And I don't know, this is one of the reasons I've recently come to appreciate the merit of being surrounding yourselves by these artifacts of history. Because it's just a reminder of where we've been. I mean, you and I could have been born in 1820, and you would not have been able to buy an American clock, anywhere. And if you were born in 1900, suddenly clock salesmen are crawling all over you, going, "Don't you want a clock?" It's
Well,
fascinating.
I also want to, so let's talk a little bit about the evolution of this, of time and its importance in our lives. Like, as you said, when everyone was in agricultural regions, they didn't have the same sense of timekeeping. And then suddenly you're working strange hours in a factory and you have to have absolute precision with the time. And it has to be like uniform and everyone has to be on the same page there. So we really did change as human beings, like our perception of time. And I wonder whether that's for the worse or for the better. But it is what it is now. But then you've seen that evolution continue. So as the devices, like if we're actually just talking about the evolution of the technology, of the physical devices that keep our time, they've sort of evolved. We mentioned briefly like battery operated clocks on walls, and then you started to get these digital clocks, and then you had like that weird phase where you had, those things that you like flick them and they go and there's like LED lights that stab the time. You don't really see many people with those anymore, but like all these fun clocks. And then suddenly the smartphone came around, and that has actually had a very significant impact. Like if I'm just thinking about like when I was in year 12, I was actually obsessed with watches. So especially Swatch watches. My sister went away to France for a year, and I just inherited all of her clothes. She's 4 years older than I am. So she was like the coolest kid in the world. So I just inherited all these cool watches, and I'd wear them. I became known as like the watch girl. I had like the coolest watches, and it's funny because I was obsessed with them, and I built up this collection, and I probably still have some of them somewhere. But there came a point where I stopped wearing a watch because I was carrying my phone everywhere I was, and there was no point in having two things that did the same thing. It was a bit superfluous. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of that, because it's not just like a pragmatic impact and a shift in how we tell time. It has like farther-reaching implications.
It probably does, and I'm not sure I entirely understand them. I know what you mean. I used to love wearing a watch, and I wouldn't even think about it now.
Well, I mean, the implications I'm talking about, I mean, there's a big difference between having a watch on your wrist that tells you the time, and it's not invasive. You can look at your watch, but it's always there as a resource. And having a device here that tells the time, but also does a million other things that, because you're carrying it around, is distracting you. Like people carry their phone around as a timekeeping device as well. But this new technology, this is a technology that can spy on you. This is technology that to distract you in a million different ways.
Younger people are getting more used to it. I've noticed this, and I do want to return to this idea of like why we even care about time at all, which is why it's so fascinating. But younger people, I think, have much more discipline about the use of their cell phones. I've noticed this, that when you hang out, in multi-generational crowds, like older people constantly looking up everything on their phones and, saying, "Hey Siri," asking you questions, and they're obsessed with looking up everything anybody's saying.
Whenever they're lonely, they just have a conversation with Siri. "Hey Siri, tell me something nice."
Yeah, and it's like younger people just like, they pretty much are much better about just keeping their phones away and like focusing and being there in the moment, just because I think older people it's like so new, and young people were born into this world and are much better at dealing with it. But here's what's interesting to me too about this whole idea of like why we care about time at all. And if you look up the origin of the word progress, I mean, basically the ancient world didn't have it, and it wasn't there in the first millennium as far as we know. It was really a kind of Middle Ages idea, this idea that of progress that actually in the linear passage of the moment, there's a chance and even a likelihood that things are going to be better later rather than where we are now. Like we can actually see more wealth, we can live longer lives, we can make the world a better place. I mean, this was a dawning of a new sensibility that you didn't experience in something like the 4th century, the 5th century, to say nothing of the 12th century, where with Black Death, like the passage of time was as likely to produce bad things as good things. And certainly the idea of progress in your own lifetime was inconceivable, or that your children were going to live better off than you. I mean, the whole idea was just survival. And you couldn't move up in your social station. You were what you were born to be, and the average lifespan, once you include child mortality throughout most of human history, has been about 22 years. So we defied all that. And once we began to kind of like lean against the wind of nature and actually see progress, be able to move, get a better job, see income, start earning money instead of just...
Is that the clock?
No, that was...
Because I was going to say, that's not the nicest sounding clock there, Jeffrey. Like,
it's actually kind of pretty good. I must tell you that in moving it from one room to the next, I messed up the gong, so I'm gonna have to...
Oh no!
It was supposed to gong 12 times, now it gong 2. So this is what these are high maintenance little tools.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's funny. Phil Magnus, who repaired the clock for me, is going to be furious at me, but he'll figure it out. He loves these puzzles. But it's a beautiful thing when it dawned on people that tomorrow could be better than today, and we take that for granted. But actually, that was new in the world with the advent of the bourgeois spirit and capitalism, and so suddenly time became interesting, became something to love and appreciate and look forward to the passage of time. So then you want to know about it. You get this insatiable desire to know when, what is today and what is tomorrow? What is this month and what is next month? What is this year and what is the next year? In fact, it's one of the funniest things about the earliest grandfather clocks is that they tried to keep the track of the day and the month and the year too. Which is funny because that's why so many of these old grandfather clocks have like a moon with a happy smile on it. It's like moving around. That's pretty funny because we could and because it mattered. And I think that's really interesting. This birth of the idea of progress came with the advance of freedom itself, and those are inextricably linked together in the course of time.
I mean, there are other things to consider as well. So there are some comments. I'll switch over views so that we can keep track there. But there are comments in the chat there. People are saying that what kind of stresses them out, having constantly keeping up with time, reminds them that they're not doing their job. It's extra pressure. And so we do have to look at the implications of having time as this centerpiece in our life. Like, it's interesting in Atlas Shrugged, the story opens with Dagny, and she's looking out, and there's a big giant calendar that has a number on there that tells you the date, and it's like counting down and all of these things. Like, there's a giant clock, and there's kind of this centerpiece, and she says there's this phrase on the tip of her tongue. She can't quite remember what this phrase is, and then later on in the book she realizes that's the phrase, your days are numbered. This idea of thinking about the passage of time, like, it's, humans, it really does put some pressure on us. And I don't know whether it's just like this biological instinct that, we need to get things done, or whether that's something that's evolved since we've been able to capture time in such a way. But like, for women, it's biological. We're thinking about the passing of time because up to a certain point, like, we can't have children after that, right? But, men and women, there are different things we want to accomplish in our lives. Thinking about the passing of time can be really stressful. So
it can be. So it's both things, right? We look forward to the passage of time in a free society where there's capitalistic creation because we expect that we're going to see new and better things tomorrow rather than today. But we also know, from ashes you came, and to ashes you will return. So we understand the presence of mortality also, and it's slightly terrifying. So both of those things are going on, at once, and our lives are constantly toggled between them. How much time do I have left? Or the famous case of you talk about women's mindsets concerning biology, but I think it's often the case that midlife crisis is ascribed to men. They turn 40 and think, what have I done with my life? We have enough to do to really live, and so on. So, yeah.
So what did you do? Have you had a midlife crisis, Jeffrey? And if so,
everybody knows about my midlife crisis. I went out and bought a sports car.
And you became obsessed with clocks as well. So let's not forget that important thing. That's the strangest midlife crisis I've ever seen in my life. Jeffrey just becomes obsessed.
Have you noticed there's some people who are really excited about their birthdays and other people who are not. Now I'm one of the not category. But I have colleagues who start telling me about their birthday like a week or two in advance. They're like, well, that is my birthday. My birthday's coming up. Well, that's 2 days before my birthday. Or, well, that will be on my birthday. That's the day after my birthday. It's like, I get that your birthday is really important to you. That's funny, isn't it?
It's, I also think there's kind of this asymmetry in how we track time. And I think that it may be unhealthy, and this may need to evolve as we move and progress as a society, because I think that people tend they're tracking their time and their day, and they're thinking, this is how many hours I've got awake today and all of this, and they're constantly thinking, well, I don't have enough time right now. But there's this idea that although I don't have enough time right now, I'm going to have plenty of time in the future. And it's this idea that we're not really ever presently aware of our mortality, that we don't have infinite time ahead of us. And I'm wondering whether that way that we look at our lives, we're constantly focused now, we procrastinate a lot, we're constantly presuming we have much more time in the future, whether that has something to do with the way we keep time. Because a clock, we're thinking in 24-hour cycles, right? That's sort of how we programmed ourselves. I wonder if I had a poster on my wall that had 4,000 written on it, and that's the number of weeks that I will live in my life, which is about, the human lifespan. And if that was constantly counting down, if I'd have a healthier relationship with my time management, because everything, it's so focused right now, and then we put things off and all of this, and we busy ourselves with things that aren't important, rather than kind of guiding our lives according to, well, this is how much time I presume I'm going to have. I'm going to fill it all, rather than presuming that I'm going to have a lot more time later on than I do right now.
This is part of the difficulty, right? None of us actually know for sure, how long we're going to live. But here's the very interesting thing too. Random occurrences of death are becoming ever less frequent, in the course of history. And certainly for our infant mortality rate is half now what it was 200 years ago, for example. And when I say half, I mean I didn't use the right statistic. It's 1 out of 2 people 200 years ago were dead before the age of 5. Now
wow.
It's 0.4% are dead before the age. So it's amazing. And in the Middle Ages, just traveling from one town to the next, you're more than likely to get beaten, robbed, killed, and pillaged.
Right.
And now we go about our lives safely, and we have this weird sense of we're more confident today about a long life than any human beings in the whole history of the world. And we can speak about this. It's very interesting to hear you talk about this, how many days do I have left, and there's a presumption that, that probably that it's all going to stop for us somewhere between 75 and 85,
And then you have this new wave of people, sort of this ANCAP transhumanist cypherpunk type person who's listen, the singularity is going to happen, and we're all going to merge with code. I'm going to live forever. I'm going to be uploaded to cloud. Whatever happens, I honestly, I don't live my life thinking that one day I won't be around. That idea is the furthest thing from my mind. I'm thinking, okay, there's going to come a point in time where they'll figure out how to transplant my brain into a synthetic body so I can just replace parts as we go. That's literally how I live my life, thinking, Naomi, you're fine. You'll get it all done. No worries, because robots.
That's really interesting. I mean, death has never been anything I've ever been afraid of. And I don't know, that's not even anything of particular dread. I mean, I don't understand. But it was funny, I remember a few years ago writing an article, and I just mentioned in passing that mortality is something that we'll all be faced with. And I had a guy come up to me later, and he was red-faced and furious, and he said, I have to disagree profoundly with your article. Mortality is not in any sense inevitable. And I said, what are you saying? That we're not going to die? I'm pretty sure we're going to die. He said, no, I think we can beat it.
I think we can too, Jeffrey. Honestly, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people about this, and interviewed like people about what is the concept of aging, because we think of that as inevitable. There are creatures in the world that don't age. There are types of jellyfish that don't age. So it is possible to figure out what's going on with these creatures, and especially with things like CRISPR, start to genetically alter as a species. I mean, I don't know whether it'll be in my lifetime, probably not, but you're thinking about, like, let's say in 200 years, this technology is so advanced, it would not surprise me if we could figure out how to beat this, which would be a completely different shift in how we conceptualize society. You know, it seems abhorrent to people these days because they're like, you know, death is natural, everything moves in cycles, this is how the world works, and all of these things. But you know what? Maybe in like 1,000 years, people will be saying, can you believe people used to, you know, die after 80 years and that was considered normal?
My fear of that world is, though, Naomi, and I'm being serious here, if people live too long, they get cynical. And they get in bad moods.
But what if they get a second wind? What if they're only getting cynical because they're starting to become aware of their ever-present mortality and their days being numbered? And what if that wasn't there? Like, would that create a freedom for us? I mean, our conception of time and how it passes, like things we take for granted these days, and things that seem unnatural these days because we didn't grow up with them. Like, you know, we look back and we look at the, as you said, the infant mortality rate. It's abhorrent to us, the idea that so many children could die. And you know, like, can you imagine being back at that time? You would never presume all your children would stay alive,
I know.
ever.
And have you thought about this? It's like overwhelming to me that like half of the kids born 200 years ago were dead before the age of 5, meaning that everyone lived in the constant presence of death and loss, you know? And if you've ever had a loved one die, I mean, it just like impacts you just so profoundly, you know? Like even miscarriages, you know, take women a long time to get over, you know?
Yeah.
Or if you've ever lost a child, or your parents die or something, like it just hits you. But so the less death we experience, I think the less sort of misery, you know, and sadness is in our lives. I think, I'm not sure about that. It sounds right. I can't imagine be around 200 years ago when you know half the children were dead. You know, where you were just grateful for the kid to live, you know, to be born, for the mother to live through childbirth. You know.
You know what? That's a larger lesson right there, Jeffrey. Because what you're talking about is taking for granted things in our lives that have just become so normalized. Because you're talking about an era where these things, where life was hard. You know, if your parents were still around, wow. You know, because that was not normal. If you still had all your children, wow. If you didn't have some sort of like a lung disease from the smoke you're inhaling from inside your hut, wow. You know, and these days we take all of that for granted. But like we were talking about Cortez a little earlier, that idea of getting to a place where we are living in such luxury and such comfort, even, you know, like you look at some of the poorest people in America who still have televisions. I mean, that's striking. I mean, obviously there are a lot of people in the world who are still living in abject poverty, and it's terrible. And I think that people who are living in a comfortable situation take their comfort completely for granted, and sort of want to take away those luxuries from others as well.
Totally, and it drives me absolutely nuts. It's like, and yet it's really interesting because it's pretty obviously the case that that even though we aspire to live a better life, ultimately living with better things and even living longer lives and living healthier lives ultimately does not give us happiness for some reason. Like, we have to find that happiness within ourselves and stop looking for it to be imparted to us from external things, because clearly it doesn't. And that's okay. But you're right. What it's particularly annoying is when people take it for granted to the point they think it's just dispensable and get rid of it, and it's not going to change anything fundamental about the quality of our lives. Like, I mean, it's amazing that you've got people out there today imagining that we can just push a button and get rid of all fossil fuels, but they would never, and meaning you could never travel on a boat or travel overseas or
never
fly.
have a smartphone, never communicate these ideas on the internet, like they're currently
but these
doing.
People would never give up their iPhone X to return to an iPhone 6.
It's funny when you put that in perspective like that.
They've never rolled back to like 2 versions ago version of Snapchat.
Yeah, they'd never go and get like an Amiga computer from 1989 and like.
Let's start with, before we get rid of internal combustion, why don't you roll back to Windows 2000?
Yeah, no, it's amazing what we take for granted now. And also, I mean, you could point out a hypocrisy as soon as you start talking about rolling things back there, because you could say like, oh, well, that's ridiculous because an Amiga computer, didn't, create as much value. It was less efficient, less energy efficient. It, couldn't do as much. So technology's progressed, and it's like, aha. Exactly. So you're talking about this idea that, having all of these things, it's terrible because we get more and more and the planet gets worse and worse, completely ignoring the fact that technology is getting more efficient, more energy efficient as we go, is getting much better. And, you think about air conditioners 20 years ago compared to air conditioners today. You look at your dishwasher 20 years ago compared to today, and like the little water and energy saver ratings, the stickers they put on these days, like everything is progressing. And it's sort of like this, it's a Malthusian fallacy, right? The idea of like limited resources, we're going to run out at a certain time, forgetting that technology evolves and we change the way we do things over time according to the needs that we have as a society. So it's yeah.
And one of the things I should have showed you when you were here, like right beneath me, you can go downstairs and you can go to the boiler room, but off the boiler room is this gigantic, what looks like a dungeon. And it's just completely empty right now, but there was a hole on the side that went up to the street. And it's remarkable because this is, through that hole, what would happen when the house was first built is they would put coal into it, and it would fill up the entire room with coal, and this coal was shoveled out and put into the boiler just to keep the house warm. That really went on like right downstairs from me. And now, of course, it's entirely oil operated, and it creates steam, and the whole house is run by steam heat, which, by the way, is pretty rare these days and vastly more comfortable than indoor heating. I mean, it's normal air conditioning heating. It's way better. That's why this house is always so warm and luxurious and wonderful. But anyway, it used to run with coal. I mean, and so it's fun to kind of be in the presence of this, this technological progress and just become aware of what we used to have to deal with, And not all the things we left behind are inferior to the things we've left today. I've come to that view.
Yeah.
Iron skillets are just better than modern skillets, actually. And steam heat in a house is better than typical central air. So, it's true. And in some cases, a chemical clock is more romantic than a digital one.
You're a romantic man, Jeffrey. Like, it's more romantic. Yeah.
You know what's funny, Naomi? It's very interesting because I'm about to come out with my 10th book.
Oh wow! Really?
Yes, and it's called The Market Loves You: Why You Should Love It Back.
I love that. I think that's awesome.
It's filled with all kind of essays on everything. But what's interesting about it is my first book that has just a hint of nostalgia.
Huh.
Because I've a lot of essays on the origin of canning, on mechanical clocks, on iron skillets.
Now, what was the impetus behind that? Because you've always been a very forward-looking person. You've always been someone that revels in the advancement of society, of advancement in technology.
I don't entirely understand it. I only realized this once I finally put it all together, and I looked at it and I thought, this is a little bit nostalgic. And unlike Jetson's World, unlike Bourbon, unlike Beautiful Anarchy and so on, this book has an element of nostalgia, and I think it really does come from this growing sense I have of gratitude, and looking back and seeing, like Hayek talked about, how we're the inheritors of thousands of years of development, and that we need to become more profoundly aware of it in order to deepen our philosophical sense of our present times and our place and the meaning of life. And I've taken that seriously, and I've found it just absolutely fascinating. So I think
So when does that come out?
I'm getting the first draft from the typesetter back on Friday. So then I'll have to go through it and everything. So it'll be about another 30 days, but I'm excited about it.
That's very exciting. I mean, it does make me wonder, like when you're talking about old skillets are better than the new skillets. So there are all these things that are completely true. You know, people always say that if you're buying appliances, these days appliances last for 5 years. Back in the day, they might last for 20 years. They were built better. But there is a big difference there. Like, although I agree with that, and it's absolutely true, appliances today are far more affordable. You look at the amount of your wage that you were spending on these things, it makes a lot of sense that it was a huge expenditure because these were long-lasting, better-made products, but they just took a vast proportion of your income. Whereas today, one of the benefits that we've lived off, which could be a benefit and a curse, it has pros and cons, is that we're able to buy goods that are so much cheaper. And yes, they are more shoddily made and they don't last as long. And then that leads into people being very, very critical of this consumer culture where we're constantly replacing rather than fixing. And I agree with that to some extent. But I also, I don't take for granted the fact that I can have so many different convenient appliances and cool things that I would have never been able to dream of before because I would not have been able to afford them.
Yeah. So I think what you're really speaking to is something I would someday hope to get my brain around to be able to write about. But what you have here is, on one hand, government regulations seriously deprecating products and making them not work as well as they used to. That's the reason dishwashers don't work as well. That's the reason our clothes don't get as clean. That's the reason our toilets don't flush and our water
wait, dishwashers are government regular? You gotta walk me through that.
All this stuff is like seriously controlled by government. Water use regulations, and it's just terrible. That's why your dishes are spotted when they come out. I mean, your laundry soap no longer includes phosphates and everything. It's just, your whites are not white anymore for this reason, and so on. So the water can't get hot enough because the hot water heaters don't heat up the water hot enough anymore. The washing machines don't use enough water because of all the environmental restrictions and so on and so on. So the regulations have seriously destroyed many of our household products. On the other hand, the market has worked to get everything more and more cheaper. So the market works in every way we allow it to, but unfortunately we've created these regulatory states that are actually stopping the market from improving in other ways. So I think in that very phenomenon you talked about, it's like, yeah, our dishwashers aren't as good, but they're much more affordable. I think the explanation really traces to this combination of, one hand, government regulations ruining our products, and the other hand, the market desperately, struggling to overcome all the barriers that are being put up in the way to get to the masses of people the things that they want. So I think, but toggling through those cause and effect relationships can be very, very tricky. I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah, for sure. So just as we wrap up here, I just want to go back to time. I mean, this show has mainly been about the technological evolution of timekeeping and also what was happening in society at the time, as timekeeping became more ever present in our lives, the shift that's incurred in our lives. And so let's just go back to that as we wrap up. And I do want to ask you your opinion on this. So that shift from this agrarian society, I mean, some people idealize it and think that, oh, well, back then life was simpler, it was better. You've already established, I mean, life was harder in ways we can't even imagine today.
People left that for a reason.
Yeah, people left for a reason, and so we've got to be cognizant of that. But at the same time, we don't want to sweep away all the concerns people have. Like progression of time, progression of technology, all of that may not be 100% a bonus. There are always pros and cons to everything. So, do you think like this constant reliance on strict timekeeping in our lives, like what sort of an impact do you think that's had on us as a society? And if there were any negatives of that, what might we start to do to overcome that?
I'm probably the worst one to ask because I'm obsessed with being on time. I don't like it when people are late. I think being on time is like the first job of a gentleman after making your bed in the morning.
And fixing your bow tie.
I just like I have this fixation of on timekeeping, and actually it's a failing on my part because I don't vacation well. and every day that goes by, I at the end of the day ask, what did I accomplish today? And I can't wait to get up in the morning to accomplish more. So, but I admit too that I've got a problem, and probably there'll come a time when I should fix that, but I don't want it to happen anytime soon.
And what do you think is driving that in you? That obsession with time and being, I mean, it doesn't exist in all cultures either.
And it doesn't exist in all cultures, and it doesn't exist in all people.
Yeah, so there are some people who are very lax and it's even hard for them to conceptualize. It's not like they're ridden with guilt if they're late for something, and their conception, they may be an hour late and they're not riddled with guilt. Like, it just doesn't occur to them that this is something that is important.
Understand it really. It's just a mindset thing, because being late is all about inconveniencing other people. There's a reason why we're supposed to be on time. It's because you don't want to be rude to the other people who you're coordinating with, essentially. So for me, it's a matter of decency and manners, and I can't even imagine living in a culture where everybody just like randomly shows up, with an hour or so, this or that way. I would just go crazy. I love our time obsessed culture at the very least. But and it might be a failing of certainly it is a failing. Like I say, I can't take vacations. I think you were you in Acapulco? You were there, right?
I wasn't. No.
You weren't. Okay. So like I just don't vacation. I just like I have to treat vacations as work, or else I don't enjoy them. So it's just bad. It's
no, I'm a bit the same. Like, as you see, we go to a lot of conferences together. I'm always carrying like my light and 2 tripods and 3 cameras.
You are the worst. Oh, I have a funny thing to tell you. So somebody was over in the house the other day, and I was showing off our clocks and that sort of thing, and he said this. So what happens if you just forget to wind the clocks and the time absolutely stops? And we're like, how do you find out what time it is? And I said, well, it just so happens that around the corner out back on the porch we have a sundial. And then I added, or you could just take out your iPhone and find out.
Yeah, exactly. Type in the internet. What is the time? Siri, what is the time?
Hey, Google. Right.
That's funny. It's funny how some of these older technologies, these analog technologies, are coming back into vogue for whatever reason. It's not just an obsession with vinyl records and record players or gramophones or, things like that. I think it even goes further and becomes a more pragmatic thing when we're talking about like safe storage of private keys, for example, and everyone's like, well, the only way you can store them is to write it down on pen and paper, and it's fascinating how we kind of do this like full circle there, that like we understand all the modern conveniences, and we love this new tech, and we love the privacy that it enables us and the autonomy that it enables us like never before, and at the same time, we're also becoming aware in a nice kind of balanced way of the good parts of older technology that we can still harness, and I quite like that balance.
No, I think that's right, and it's fascinating to me too how one of the things, Ed Stringham, he's the president of the American Institute of Economic Research, he's always careful to write everybody thank you notes on crane paper and send them in the mails, and I tell you, people really appreciate it. So
you know what he should look into? So there's this robot out there, and it's a company. I actually interviewed them about 5 years ago for Reason. We were doing an episode on robots, and what you do is you hand in a bunch of your writing samples, like letters and things. It analyzes them and creates a typeset of your writing, and then from then, if you want to send a handwritten note to someone, you type a message, or you can even text them a message, say like, hi Jeffrey, great stream today, so good to chat with you, love Naomi, and you click send, and it literally gets a robot to write that handwritten note, puts it in an envelope with like a seal thing, and physically sends it out in what looks like...
Telling Ed about this, and he would say, oh no, so bad, so bad.
And you know why that is? It's because people, like, the whole point, reason why we like handwritten notes it's not for the physical thing. It's because of the impetus behind it, because of the intention behind it. It's someone taking their time out. We're recognizing there, even if it's not fully consciously, we're recognizing that this is a less efficient means of communication. It's less efficient, but it requires like, you know, physical contact with something, and so you're willing to take extra time out doing this less efficient thing because they mean so much to you. So it's like, it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. That's exactly right. And by the way, he uses a fountain pen.
Oh, I love fountain
and
pens.
an inkwell on his desk. So there you go.
I love it. I love it. Well, Jeffrey, this has been a wonderful chat. I really appreciate you chatting with me. It's been fantastic, and I'm going to be posting the 2 links to your AIER articles in the description.
I have one called The Magical Mystery of the Mechanical Clock. The second one I wrote was called Imagine a Clock That Doesn't Surveil You.
Because we're sitting here and NSA just heard our entire conversation.
Right. That's right. So that's something else. And then the third one is about the strange economics of mechanical clock repair, in which I am broadcasting to the world of mechanical clock repair people that need to raise their prices. So, which they were very glad to get that message.
Well, everyone, I'll post those links so you can check those out. But also go to AIER.org, because Jeffrey, as you all know, if you know and love Jeffrey, which all of you do, looking at these comments here, like literally people, Jeffrey, you can't see them, but just everyone is like, I love Jeffrey. Oh, Jeffrey's the greatest. He's so cool. Like, you know, you've heard it before. But you're a prolific writer. You have a book coming out sometime in like the next month or so, and if you want to check out more articles, then go to AIER.org. But that's, I mean, Jeffrey isn't the only person that I'm going to be highlighting on this series. There are some amazing authors at AIER. So for this Authors Corner that we've set up, I will be doing a regular series where I interview each of these authors about the different specific topics of interest that they have. And so in the meantime, make sure you're checking out the website and keeping up to date with all of the amazing writing that's going on there. It's just a fantastic treasure trove. And I know, like, I'm looking at some of these people in the chat here, Roger, JR, like, I mean, you guys, I know how much you like to research. I know how much you like to read about all this stuff. So make sure you're checking out their website and yeah, realizing what a great source of information there, not just like data, but just philosophical contemplation as well. So thank you so much, Jeffrey. This has been fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. This has been great. So I will stop the stream. There's a little bit of a lag, but it will end.